Societies function through a delicate equilibrium between laws, norms, and shared values. Laws provide structure, norms shape behavior, and shared values give legitimacy to both. When these forces are balanced, society remains resilient, able to evolve without fracturing. But when one dominates, whether through rigid legal control, entrenched traditions, or ideological purity, governance breaks down, leading to authoritarianism, cultural stagnation, or social fragmentation. This national security live-action role-play module, entitled Restoring Equilibrium in AI Governance, immerses players in a world where this balance has collapsed. In the digital age, artificial intelligence plays an increasing role in shaping culture and governance. Yet AI systems do not operate neutrally. They reflect the power structures that train and regulate them. Today, corporate legal frameworks dominate AI governance, allowing companies to claim ownership over cultural expression, silence dissenting voices, and reshape public discourse in ways that prioritize economic control over communal values. The result is a society where social norms and ethical beliefs are sidelined in favor of legal precedent, often to the detriment of cultural heritage and digital freedoms. Through live-action roleplay, participants will step into a dynamic environment where this imbalance has reached a crisis point. Players take on the roles of operatives within a decentralized movement, tasked with diagnosing the root of the problem, coordinating strategic interventions, and working, sometimes in cooperation, sometimes in conflict, to restore a functional equilibrium. But intervention is not without risk. Will your actions tip the scales too far in the other direction? Can stability be achieved without reinforcing the very systems that created the crisis? By engaging in intelligence gathering, negotiation, digital resistance, and tactical operations, players will experience firsthand the complexity of governance and the ever-present challenge of maintaining balance in an evolving world. In restoring equilibrium in AI governance, the question is not just how to fix the system, but how to ensure that any solution remains flexible, just, and sustainable in the long term. Societies depend on a careful balance between three fundamental pillars: laws, norms, and common values. Laws are formal rules and regulations enforced by institutions such as governments and courts. Norms represent informal yet powerful expectations about socially acceptable behavior maintained through community interactions. Common values are deeper ethical beliefs shared across the society, such as fairness, freedom, or human dignity, which shape both norms and laws. When laws, norms, and common values are balanced, each pillar supports the others, creating stability, resilience, and adaptability within society. Laws reinforce social norms, norms uphold ethical values, and common values provide legitimacy to both laws and norms. However, if any one element becomes overly dominant, it undermines the other two, creating instability and systemic dysfunction. If the balance among these three pillars fails, society risks falling into crisis. Each type of dominance has its own dangerous consequences. Legal dominance. When laws become excessively powerful, they override social norms and shared ethical principles. The result is authoritarian control, where compliance with rules takes precedence over ethical legitimacy or cultural traditions. Society becomes rigid, oppressive, and resistant to organic change. Normative dominance. When norms become inflexible, society resists new ideas, technologies, or policies necessary for progress. Laws exist, but they are ignored if they conflict with entrenched customs. Societal evolution slows, and cultural stagnation sets in. Value dominance. When common values become absolute ideologies, society splits into factions competing over rigid moral frameworks. Laws and norms become instruments of ideological purity, leading to polarization, social fragmentation, and conflict. To illustrate, consider the current problem of AI governance. Corporations legally claim ownership over cultural elements, such as Disney trademarking the name Mufasa, despite its cultural origins. This corporate legal dominance sidelines traditional cultural norms and shared ethical values about collective heritage, causing social tension and cultural marginalization. In NSLARP scenarios, players experience firsthand the consequences of imbalance and dominance among laws, norms, and common values. The overarching objective is for players to recognize the imbalance, understand its consequences, and strategically intervene to restore balance. Players will act within a dynamic environment filled with competing factions, shifting alliances, and unpredictable outcomes. An NSLARP scenario unfolds in 3 sequential phases, guiding players from diagnosis to tactical action, and finally to a rebalanced outcome. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering and diagnosis. Players enter the scenario, interacting with various characters and sources of information. They must determine precisely which pillar, laws, norms, or values, is currently dominant, causing societal imbalance. Accurate diagnosis is crucial for effective intervention. Phase 2. Tactical intervention and decentralized action. Players form teams to execute strategic operations. They conduct decentralized interventions, carefully choosing actions aimed at weakening the dominant pillar and strengthening the weakened pillars. Players must constantly evaluate the evolving environment, as interventions can trigger unexpected consequences or create new imbalances. Phase 3. Rebalancing and equilibrium testing. Players see the outcomes of their interventions unfold. Success comes from carefully balancing their actions, restoring equilibrium without creating new instability. If they fail, players must reassess and intervene again, emphasizing that equilibrium is an ongoing dynamic process, not a fixed destination. Scenarios require the identification of 3 potential failure states, each corresponding to the dominance of one pillar. Players must carefully assess and intervene based on the nature of the imbalance. Failure. State 1. Legal dominance, authoritarianism, and cultural control. Players encounter a society where strict legal frameworks dominate governance. Institutional authorities, such as corporations controlling AI moderation, use legal tools to dictate what cultural expressions are permitted, overriding community norms and shared ethical values. People lose the ability to freely express themselves culturally, leading to social frustration and resentment. To respond, players must act to weaken this legal dominance they might engage in. Exposing institutional abuses through whistleblowing or leaks, mobilizing communities to challenge excessive regulations, encouraging policymakers to reconsider oppressive laws in light of social norms and common ethical values. The goal is not to eliminate law, but to return it to its proper role of supporting, rather than suppressing, societal norms and shared values. Failure State 2. Normative dominance, social inertia, and resistance to change. In this condition, players face a society deeply resistant to change due to entrenched social customs and norms. Even beneficial laws or ethical reforms struggle to take root because society adheres strictly to tradition. Technological innovations or new cultural ideas face intense opposition from communities that view change as threatening. Players' interventions must focus on shifting social expectations and introducing alternative norms. This might involve running campaigns to persuade communities of the value of change, introducing new cultural narratives or symbols that reshape public perception, gradually building social acceptance for reforms to law and ethics. By weakening rigid norms, players create space for the necessary legal and ethical adaptations to occur. Failure State 3. Value dominance, ideological extremism, and societal fragmentation. Here, players face a society fractured by rigid ideological values. A revolutionary or extremist movement enforces a single moral or ethical viewpoint, rewriting laws and suppressing norms that do not align with their ideology. Opposing factions arise, creating intense polarization, social conflict, and governance paralysis. Players must address this by reintroducing moderation and ethical nuance. Their interventions may involve initiating dialogue and negotiation among opposing ideological factions, highlighting contradictions and ethical inconsistencies within the dominant ideology to weaken its grip, supporting moderate voices, and reframing common values as flexible, inclusive, and adaptable. This approach aims to restore societal cohesion and create a governance system guided by balanced laws and adaptable norms, not rigid ideology. The key to success in the NSLARP scenario lies in decentralized coordination. Teams designing their own interventions while clearly understanding their unique strengths and roles within the larger context. For maximum effectiveness, consider the following guidance clearly during play. Intelligence operations first identifies exactly how and why governance has become imbalanced and prioritizes where interventions should focus. They share precise and actionable intelligence with all other teams, ensuring coordinated, targeted actions. Cybersecurity secures digital communication channels and undermines adversaries' digital control, empowering other teams to communicate and coordinate actions securely and efficiently. Counterintelligence ensures the integrity of internal operations, safeguarding your decentralized network from infiltration or sabotage, maintaining balance internally, and avoiding overly aggressive actions. Diplomatic interventions shape the public narrative, mediate tensions between groups, and facilitate societal acceptance of corrective measures, ensuring that equilibrium, once restored, has broad legitimacy and lasting support. Tactical response quickly intervenes where most urgently needed, taking direct, impactful actions that visibly shift power dynamics on the ground, supporting broader diplomatic and strategic operations. All teams must carefully monitor outcomes, recognizing that any intervention risks creating new unintended imbalances. Constant communication, information sharing, and adaptability are necessary. AI governance and the crisis of cultural ownership. Today, artificial intelligence profoundly shapes cultural narratives, determining what information is accessible, how culture is expressed online, and which narratives gain legitimacy. Yet these AI systems do not operate neutrally. They operate according to laws shaped predominantly by corporate interests. Specifically, corporations exploit existing legal frameworks, copyright, trademarks, and intellectual property law to claim ownership over culture. Consider a concrete example. Corporations like Disney have successfully trademarked culturally significant terms such as Mufasa, despite the name's deep cultural roots in the Swahili language and heritage. Traditional communities who historically created and nurtured these cultural narratives have no equivalent legal tools to challenge corporate appropriation. AI companies, driven primarily by legal risk management, default to recognizing these corporate claims to avoid expensive legal conflicts. This prioritization reinforces and expands corporate dominance, as AI platforms effectively enforce corporate IP claims, ignoring community cultural norms and common values of cultural fairness. The dominance of corporate law in AI governance leads directly to systemic dysfunction. Social norms weaken. When corporate IP law determines cultural legitimacy, community-driven norms of shared cultural ownership and expression lose influence. Communities increasingly view their own cultural heritage as subject to corporate approval rather than collective tradition. Common values fragment. Ethical principles that affirm culture as communal property, belonging collectively to humanity, become marginalized. Instead, economic logic prevails. What matters is legal ownership, not historical legitimacy or cultural fairness. The result is a cultural ecosystem where powerful corporations dictate what is visible, protected, or censored, exacerbating historical inequalities and silencing marginalized cultural voices. This condition illustrates clearly how legal dominance disrupts equilibrium, creating societal tensions and unfair cultural representation. In response, some suggest creating stronger legal protections for cultural groups. Yet this approach further entrenches existing imbalance for three reasons. Legal bias toward corporate power. The existing legal system historically prioritizes commercial and economic interests, inherently advantaging corporations. Using more laws to solve imbalance simply reinforces the very system that caused it. Law's inherent inflexibility. Legal frameworks are rigid, slow-moving, and poorly suited for rapidly evolving digital technologies like AI. By the time laws catch up, the damage to cultural legitimacy has already occurred. Incompatibility with cultural reality. Culture is inherently collective, fluid, and shared. Legal frameworks that treat culture as exclusive property distort its nature and further empower corporate monopolies, deepening imbalance. Given these limitations, a traditional law-centered approach cannot effectively restore equilibrium. Given the failure of centralized legal frameworks, the solution lies in decentralized governance mechanisms explicitly designed to counterbalance corporate dominance, restore social norms, and recenter common ethical values within AI governance. In this scenario, equilibrium restoration occurs through decentralized operations that strategically rebalance these three forces. Legal realignment. Rather than expanding legal control, legal strategies should restrict corporate dominance, placing clear boundaries on intellectual property claims. Law must explicitly protect culture as a shared commons. Revitalization of norms. Decentralized networks of cultural communities actively reassert informal social expectations regarding cultural ownership. These communities gain practical enforcement power through decentralized structures, ensuring their voices shape AI moderation, reaffirmation of common values. Ethical principles of fairness, diversity, and collective heritage must be embedded explicitly into decentralized governance strategies. A shared consensus on the cultural commons must regain prominence and legitimacy within digital and social spaces. To achieve this realignment effectively, players in the scenario organize into decentralized operational teams, each uniquely positioned to contribute effectively. Intelligence Operations Team. Your key mission is rapid identification and precise assessment of the extent and nature of corporate legal dominance. Pinpoint exactly how corporate AI governance suppresses social norms and fragments common values. Advise other teams on strategic priorities for targeted intervention. Cybersecurity Team. You must secure digital channels, defend community communications from corporate surveillance and manipulation, and disrupt oppressive corporate AI moderation infrastructure. Your operations directly enable cultural communities to reassert normative influence. Counterintelligence Team. Your focus is protecting decentralized operations from internal sabotage and infiltration, ensuring your collective efforts remain unified and effective. You proactively counter corporate or ideological attempts to undermine or co-opt your operations from within. Diplomatic Team. You build legitimacy, manage public perceptions, mediate disputes, and negotiate alliances among stakeholders. Critically, you restore common ethical values by framing culture as a shared commons rather than exclusive property, facilitating broad societal acceptance of decentralized governance. Tactical Response Team. Your role involves swift direct interventions, such as protests, visible resistance to oppressive AI moderation practices, or securing cultural infrastructures. These immediate actions visibly counteract corporate legal dominance, creating space for broader strategic realignment to occur. All teams operate autonomously, yet collaboratively, carefully assessing their impact and adjusting actions accordingly to avoid creating unintended new imbalances. Constant feedback loops, clear intelligence sharing, and flexible adaptation to emerging situations are critical to your success. This scenario centers on restoring equilibrium among laws, norms, and common values within society. As players, your decentralized operational teams each have specialized strengths. Each team, intelligence operations, cybersecurity, counterintelligence, diplomatic, and tactical response, must coordinate efforts effectively, diagnosing systemic imbalance, targeting critical vulnerabilities, and carrying out coordinated interventions without creating new instability. Now, we will carefully consider each team type, clarifying precisely how each can most effectively contribute to your overarching scenario goal of restoring equilibrium. An intelligence operations team serves as the critical initial assessment and strategic advisory unit within the scenario. Your main tasks in this scenario include: rapidly identify the nature of systemic imbalance, determine if the dominant force is legal authoritarianism, for example, corporate AI dominance, normative stagnation, cultural inertia, or ideological absolutism, extreme value enforcement. Use gathered intelligence to map how deeply imbalance penetrates each societal sector. Analyze vulnerability points. Pinpoint weaknesses in oppressive laws, rigid norms, or extremist values. Locate where your decentralized operations can exert maximum leverage. Advise other teams strategically. Clearly communicate to cybersecurity, diplomatic, tactical response, and counterintelligence teams precisely where their interventions can be most effective. Prioritize and coordinate actions across teams to restore equilibrium without tipping into new instability. The intelligence operations team acts as the nerve center, ensuring the scenario unfolds in an informed, strategic way, based on thorough assessments and thoughtful interpretation of intelligence. In a scenario where AI-driven corporate control dominates cultural expression, legal dominance example, a cybersecurity team has crucial roles. Defend your decentralized communications. Ensure secure, resilient channels for coordination. Protect your operations from hostile corporate and governmental surveillance and censorship. Neutralize hostile digital infrastructure. Disrupt oppressive corporate AI moderation systems. Counterattack to neutralize digital threats or intrusion attempts aimed at suppressing cultural communities or silencing dissenting narratives. Disrupt adversarial AI governance. Conduct targeted misinformation or sabotage campaigns within oppressive corporate AI networks. weaken their technological capacity to enforce censorship or cultural appropriation. In normative or ideological dominance scenarios, the cybersecurity team similarly ensures the message gets through, disrupting misinformation campaigns, censorship regimes, or extremist digital propaganda networks. The counterintelligence team ensures decentralized networks aren't compromised internally. Its strategic contributions include: monitor infiltration attempts. Keep a vigilant eye out for infiltrators, informants, or agents seeking to undermine your operational integrity or seed internal conflict within your movement. Neutralize threats internally. Employ tactics to either convert infiltrators into double agents, disorient them through misinformation, or neutralize them entirely. Prevent operational overreach. Ensure internal stability and moderate your team's operational intensity. Identify when your operations risk creating new imbalances, intervening internally to keep equilibrium as the primary goal. Counterintelligence prevents carefully planned, decentralized interventions from collapsing due to adversarial penetration or internal destabilization. A diplomatic team is critical in scenarios involving ideological polarization or when dominant laws and norms lead to societal resentment and conflict. Negotiate across ideological divides. Engage authoritarian institutions, traditional communities, or ideological factions, persuading them to soften their rigid stance or accommodate new balanced approaches. Mediate factional tensions. When societal groups become entrenched against each other, mediate directly to lower tensions and find common ground, thus supporting stable and inclusive norms and values. Influence public narrative. Ensure society broadly supports your equilibrium restoration. Shape public discourse toward an inclusive cultural narrative that highlights shared heritage, flexible ethical principles, and moderate, balanced legal frameworks. The diplomatic team reinforces legitimacy and stability, ensuring balanced governance is broadly recognized and valued by the public and key societal stakeholders. A tactical response team delivers immediate on-the-ground actions that directly affect societal balance, counteract oppressive legal enforcement. If laws dominate and suppress norms and values, you carry out carefully targeted direct actions, such as organized protests or disruption of oppressive infrastructure. Shift rigid social norms. When normative dominance prevents progress, facilitate visible cultural interventions, events, performances, community dialogues that challenge rigid social expectations and create space for new norms to emerge. Neutralize extremist ideological enforcement. If rigid values create extremism, tactically confront the ideological enforcement structure. Create situations that compel moderation or expose extremism's contradictions to the public. The tactical response team responds dynamically to rapidly changing circumstances, maintaining equilibrium through agile decision-making and swift operations. The key to success in an NSLARP scenario lies in decentralized coordination. Teams designing their own interventions while clearly understanding their unique strengths and roles within the larger context. For maximum effectiveness, consider the following guidance clearly during play. Intelligence operations first identifies exactly how and why governance has become imbalanced and prioritizes where interventions should focus. They share precise and actionable intelligence with all other teams, ensuring coordinated, targeted actions. Cybersecurity secures digital communication channels and undermines adversaries' digital control, empowering other teams to communicate and coordinate actions securely and efficiently. Counterintelligence ensures the integrity of internal operations, safeguarding your decentralized network from infiltration or sabotage, maintaining balance internally and avoiding overly aggressive actions. Diplomatic interventions shape the public narrative, mediate tensions between groups, and facilitate societal acceptance of corrective measures, ensuring that equilibrium, once restored, has broad legitimacy and lasting support. Tactical response quickly intervenes where most urgently needed, taking direct, impactful actions that visibly shift power dynamics on the ground, supporting broader diplomatic and strategic operations. All teams must carefully monitor outcomes, recognizing that any intervention risks creating new unintended imbalances. Constant communication, information sharing, and adaptability are necessary. As this NSLARP scenario vividly demonstrates, equilibrium among laws, norms, and common values is never permanently achieved. it must be actively sustained and carefully monitored. Through the interactions of these carefully organized triadic teams, players discover the critical importance of decentralized coordination, ongoing intelligence sharing, operational security, internal vigilance, careful diplomacy, and agile responses. Ultimately, the scenario teaches participants that maintaining societal equilibrium requires vigilance, continuous reassessment, and adaptable interventions. Players emerge with both tactical insights and profound philosophical understanding of governance stability. The challenge we leave players with is a reflective and continuous one. Can you restore societal balance without creating new instability? This question reinforces the scenario's core lesson. Equilibrium is not fixed, but demands continual vigilance, nuanced engagement, and careful moderation.